how will the Bills and Patriots evolve their play calling with the loss of their stud OCs? Zach Wilson sucked. Mac Jones rocked in their rookie debuts. Does it matter for really forecasting their success in 2022? Those are the questions that we'll address in today's market outlook for the AFC East. Let's hit the opening bell. What's your best bet for the AFC East?
I think it's got to be the Patriots under. I think Bill Belichick might be entering the twilight of his career. And the Patriots, they spent a lot in free agency last season. Their guys are getting older. Yes, Mac Jones was good as a rookie, but there are a lot of holes on that roster. They're playing in what should be a better division. I think the Patriots are a sell this year.
I wanted to make a bet live, and Patriots are under 8.5. I do have conviction in this play. So definitely love the Patriots under. I think they lost so much this offseason. There's some people kind of citing Pythag, and something that we'll talk about more on these streams, that suggested that the Patriots actually could have performed even better than their 10 wins, that the Pythag is around like 11, kind of 12 wins. And that suggests that maybe they're being underrated, or that they were at least being underrated last season. So we kind of see again where the market is kind of positioned right now. You have the Bills at the top at 12. I mean, that is really aggressive. Then you have the Patriots around 8.5, Dolphins 9, Jets 6.
Yeah, I think the Dolphins under stands out. I think the Dolphins are really embarking on an experiment this offseason. I think by trading for Tyreek Hill, already having Jalen Waddle, trading away Devontae Parker, I think they're almost signaling that they're going to play to Tua's strengths, which are releasing the ball quickly, throwing accurately, relying on yards after the catch, which I think is going to give up kind of the ability to throw the ball down the field. I don't think they're even going to be holding onto the ball very long. I think Tua is going to get the ball out of his hands real quickly. And I think while there are certainly cases for upside, I think with a rookie head coach, with an offense that's really kind of one-dimensional, which is going to be relying on yards after the catch, they were terrible running the ball. Their offensive line is still bad. That shouldn't really change next year. With a one-dimensional offense, there's a real case and a tale for the Dolphins to be really, really bad.
Yeah, I think that's attractive, especially at the pricing. Plus 200. There's a lot of moving pieces there. And one of the things that we talked about last week was if you're underpricing that phenomenon, then there's potential upside to taking the over on that. It's something that we kind of flirted with last week when we were talking about the Giants. There's so many moving pieces there, but everyone's writing it off as it's certainly not going to come together. There's a lot of moving pieces for the Dolphins as well. And so is it all going to come together in just one season? Let's get into the Jets. Let's start with, again, kind of looking back and kind of recapping some of their 2021 performance to set the stage as we kind of look forward into 2022. See, the average kind of power ranking was around 29. Started the season off 0-3, 0-3 against the spread. Had a surprising win against Tennessee. And then moved up rapidly simply because they played competitively with the Falcons. And then had that very surprising win against the Bengals, which knocked out. That was the first game that knocked out a huge swath of the survivor pools. Because pretty much leading all the way up into that game, like 75% of the pool was still involved. And then about 50%, boom, gone in that game.
And even this is a good point just in general about power rankings and volatility and actually buying changes. Look at where the Bengals were. Right, the Bengals had actually started their upswing. They were 12th in their game against the Jets. They lost kind of a weird, variant game against the Jets. And then we'll see when we preview the AFC North, they also started to take a tumble before they eventually climbed back up. A good reminder of variance in football and volatility and kind of always wanting to be on the right side of where teams will end up, even through the noise of the NFL regular season.
And so we see, like, going into 2021, the Jets had a win total expectation of 6. Didn't even meet that. Went 4-13, 6-11 against the spread. This is one of the nastiest numbers that I've seen thus far, kind of putting these slides together. A 100 unit better betting on the Jets last year on their money line and spread, lost $1,000. Pythag had them around 4 wins. Our Pythag 2.0 actually had them at 5.3, so a little bit better than realized performance. But one of the kind of key inputs to Pythag 2.0 is, as we know, one of the key inputs to Pythag 1.0 is points for, points against. And so essentially Pythag 2.0 looks at points for over expectation and points against over expectation. So if a team is expected to win by 7 and they win by 7, they get 0 benefit for that. It's only in excess of how much they were supposed to win by is what they'll actually be credited for. Never really flirted with kind of anyone, I would say, abandoning their thesis on the Jets at any point in time last season. There was always pretty much a perception that they were bad. Zach Wilson started the first kind of 6-7 games. Then he got hurt. Mike White came in and performed actually quite admirably. In fact, I would say when he was performing, that's when the Jets offense actually kind of clicked for a little bit. And that, in fact, that's when they beat the Bengals.
That's right. And even had a pretty good first quarter against the Colts before he got hurt. And even Josh Johnson stepped in.
And that was another game where they were huge underdogs. Again, a 10-point underdog. And you're right. Throughout that kind of first quarter or so, they were kind of making Colts bettors nervous for sure.
If anything, it actually points to the power of the offensive play calling. Zach Wilson was awful last year. There's no way around that. We'll talk about whether that matters. But I think it says more about how the Jets position their quarterbacks than Mike White being good. I don't think Mike White's an NFL quarterback, but the very fact that he could put up 34 points speaks to kind of the power of the offensive design and the offensive game plan.
We see on the right side, kind of like how the market positioned around the Jets on a week-to-week basis. And it's pretty much red across the board. The 2 times that they kind of hit the green from a betting percentage perspective, so at least kind of more than 50% of the betting market kind of leaning into them, was versus the Falcons, which they were competitive, but lost against the spread. And then late in the season versus the Jags, when they actually did win that game. So now let's kind of go into the offseason, look at the NFL draft. I'm not an expert on the NFL draft. One of the reasons why I solicited help from Ron A. Sports over here, who does a whole breakdown, kind of detailed analysis of every team, every pick. It's really impressive. He just provides some really sharp insights. But so I basically kind of got some of his reports he sent across to me so we could share on the stream, and then shared a few nuggets from his reports. He's certainly excited with Garrett Wilson from Ohio State. And so that just adds even more ammunition to an already kind of young wide receiver core. And then also they drafted running back Breece Hall from Iowa State. And I've heard mixed reports on him. A 2nd-round pick. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. One of the things I was reading, though, is he's not great kind of off the tackle. So that could potentially mitigate some of his upside. Yeah, so let's talk now about other offseason changes for the Jets. So boosted the offensive line, replaced Marcus May with Jordan Whitehead, signed CJ Uzoma, lost Jamison Crowder, but again, he couldn't necessarily stay healthy kind of year in and year out. Had a decent year last year.
Elijah Moore is going to be an upgrade in the slot.
There's more than enough talent in the wide receiver core to kind of absorb that loss.
Addition that's not even on this list is Mekhi Becton, who essentially was out all of last year, getting hurt in week 1. That's a top 10 tackle.
Yeah, and I think there's questions around, how healthy one is he going to be? What's his mental state? If he comes back, if he's healthy, and if he performs in line with expectation, that would be huge. You could grade the Jets offensive line as potentially, top 10, top 5, if it all kind of comes together. That would be huge for a young quarterback, like Zach Wilson, who also struggles with kind of decision making, to be able to kind of give him more time.
There certainly is a case for being above average at every position.
Let's move on to 2022 now. So still pedestrian expectations. So win total kind of expectations at 6. Our Pythag 2.0 model suggests no bet. Strength of schedule, the expectation of a strength of schedule. This is kind of using the futures implied kind of win totals. Of course, like we talked about on previous streams as well. The strength of schedule can totally change over the course of the season. Projected to be the 8th hardest still. They don't get a break from a rest perspective, so it's a net -8 days of rest for them. And then their mean spread, you kind of look across the board, you can see that they're underdogs in pretty much every game except for 3 games versus arguably like 3 of the kind of bottom 5 teams in the league.
Yeah.
So mean spread, almost 4 points. And it's probably actually a little bit higher than that since we don't have a line for the Browns. Anything stick out to you kind of when you're looking at the Jets?
I think we're going to get a pretty good sense of kind of what Zach Wilson is early on, at least the tendencies, how they plan to utilize Zach Wilson. But if I kind of like what I see and they sneak out a couple wins, let's say they're like, 2-4, 2-5, that's kind of the time where I'll be investing in the Jets' future, considering their schedule towards the second half with games against the Seahawks, Jaguars, Lions, Bears, even the Vikings aren't too daunting.
And one of the reasons I don't like this for the Jets is it's going to put pressure, obviously from the fan base for sure. If the team is struggling, which it wouldn't be unfair to suggest that they would be. I mean, they're underdogs through week 12, and these are tough games.
Obviously, if Zach Wilson's the same quarterback he was last year, they're going to be a disaster. They're not winning games. Again, they beat the Bengals last year. Anything can happen in one game. I think that's what the Bengals game represents. And who knows with the Dolphins? I don't think they're going into Lambeau and winning. I don't think they're going into Mile High and winning. But I think really the 3 of the first 5 games are very winnable.
I don't think anyone wants to open versus the Ravens.
No.
Since that always seems like that's when they put in their home run performance kind of year in and year out. I'm a little bit more bullish on the Bengals. I feel like they're like a popular sell so far in the offseason.
I'm with you.
So I still think that there's upside there, and I actually feel like market skepticism creates an opportunity there. And then I'm actually not that bearish on the Steelers either, the same way, kind of, again, relative to market expectations, particularly if Trubisky is the starting quarterback. But I want to give Trubisky a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. He always showed flashes in Chicago. It was just kind of always met with then some putrid performance.
Yeah.
I allow for the possibility that was a consequence of just a terrible coaching staff, toxic environment, kind of new resources, new team can really open up things for him.
Yeah.
And then, maybe the Dolphins.
It's really, we're dancing around the Zach Wilson question, which is if you're projecting Wilson to be the 33rd ranked quarterback, they're not winning many of these games. If you're building in a projection of, 22 or 16, it's going to look very different. And our perception of the Jets is going to look very different. Would our projection of the Jets look very different if Zach Wilson didn't play last year? How much are we putting in the? Yeah, that's fair. How much are we putting?
Because the thing is, I came in, when I watched him at BYU, especially the year before his final year, he looked just really bad. He had some highlight reel kind of plays. And one of the things I always kind of criticize someone like Justin Fields for is I feel like Justin Fields is a bad quarterback in my view. But he has just enough kind of star power, highlight reel plays that kind of keeps the believers the requisite fuel to kind of keep pushing that narrative. I was bearish coming in with Zach Wilson into the season. He obviously was a star in the preseason, and that started to kind of change a lot of people's minds. And the last thing I would say on the Jets here is just I feel like they play a lot of tough teams, and a lot of these tough teams are not the teams that are necessarily going to underperform. And then I think the bad teams they play, I think, are actually teams that could outperform. Right. Teams like the Lions, teams like the Jags, where you look at them right now and they're favorites. I would not be surprised by the time they play them that they're not favorites. Jets under. That's where I'm feeling.
The price is set fine. I might buy a future midseason.
The Miami Dolphins. 2021 came into the season with the expectation of 9 wins. They hit it. 9-8, 9-7.
The ultimate backdoor. They started at 1-7.
Red hot the second half of the season. A lot of favorable situations that were kind of outside of their control that just kind of happened to materialize.
Coming into the season, people were really, really bullish on the Dolphins. A defense that created a ton of turnovers in 2020. Right, they were power ranked, 10th in week 2 of 2021. People were really buying them for their defense.
And then, obviously sold off hard to start the season, falling, 15 spots over the next kind of 4 or 5 weeks. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 losses in a row. Probably should have been 8 losses in a row. Then got a little bit of a respite with the Texans. 1 and covered, 1 and covered, 1 and covered, 1 and covered, 1 and covered. beat the Saints, won and covered, and then got demolished by the Titans, and then came home and beat the Patriots. Once again, always play the Patriots tough. A $100 better betting the Dolphins last year made $300. Probably was down close to 1,000, probably mid-season, and came roaring back. Pythag had him at around 7.5 wins. The Pythag 2.0 model still had it around 7.5 wins, so underperforming kind of that 9 wins that they ultimately had. They had a lot of favorable positions in that second half of the year that allowed them to get those wins. Their 7-day power ranking volatility, very high, almost 5 spots per week. So the market could really never get a handle on them. Tua got hurt kind of early in the season. Brissett came in, then it was Tua, then Brissett, and then Tua. So a lot of volatility at the quarterback position. They certainly played better with Tua as he kind of closed the season out and kind of racked up a lot of those wins, except for that, again, that week 17 game versus the Titans. I don't even remember that game, but man, he played
rainy game. It was ugly. A lot of turnovers. But I think the point to highlight here is if you look at weeks 11, 12, 13, 16, they're playing a bunch of backup quarterbacks. Not just any backup quarterbacks. They're playing Mike Glennon, Ian Book, guys who were totally overmatched. But I think that really kind of helps to understand what the Miami Dolphins were last year and why, I don't know if you're seeing this. I'm seeing plenty of sentiment of the Dolphins won 9 games last year. They added Tyreek Hill. They added a bunch of pieces. That's worth a couple wins. They'll probably win 10 or 11 games. But I think this kind of paints the picture of no, this team is fundamentally probably a 6-7 win team.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is, the Pythag 2.0 model also suggests not as a 9-win team, but as a 7-win team. And then you add a couple players and maybe that gets them up another game or two, assuming health. And then that kind of puts you in line with kind of where you are from a market expectations perspective. And that's one of the reasons why it's not really suggesting any bet. The other thing that I wanted to kind of highlight here too was as they kind of started to gather steam, the market was actually kind of quick to adapt and then really started to jump on the Dolphins and were able to capitalize. So we see even like the 7-day line change. Which monitors kind of how the line moves from the Sunday night opener all the way through the next Sunday's close. And starting from week 11 all the way through week 18, the line moved in their favor. 1 point, 1 point, 4 points, 2.5 points, 7 points, 1 point. But we also see, again, the super contest pick. Twice over that time period, the Dolphins were the number 1 pick and won and covered in kind of both of those. So you kind of see a very sharp sentiment shift.
People thought the Dolphins were going to be, a top 10 team, or they're power ranked as such. And they were 1-7, and people were really asking, is this kind of fluky? Is this not? And after winning a couple games, especially the Thursday night game against Baltimore, it was like, okay, this team's a little better than their record shows. Now's the time to buy when, kind of some square people might be selling the Dolphins when they're only 3-7.
The other thing I'd highlight here too is one of the things I like looking at the max lead and max deficit. Kind of gives you an indication if they lost, how competitive were they, and also the mean win probability, which kind of is a time-weighted win probability, encapsulates how competitive they were in that game as well. We can see over the first course of those games, again, 50%, 52%. They were beating the Raiders by 14 and then ended up losing. They were beating the Jags by 10 and ended up losing. They were beating the Falcons by 7 and ended up losing. Not only ended up losing, but most of these games they didn't cover. You can also kind of look at the win probability time series to get a little bit more of a sense of kind of how that transpired. And we can kind of see that, they started off the games kind of relatively well, and as the game kind of wore on, it kind of broke down. All right, so let's go into the offseason. Not much to say about the draft since they basically traded away all their picks. Some of the commentary we got from Ron was they did a pretty decent job with what they had at their disposal. So linebacker was a huge need of theirs. He actually ranked it as their number 1 area of need. And so he liked the fact that, their highest pick there at number 3, they picked Channing Tindall from Georgia. He might be able to kind of come in and really provide some depth even here in year 1. And then another thing that Ron pointed out in his reports was, again, since they only had 4 picks this year, they signed like 10 undrafted free agents. In fact, they signed an offensive tackle. He had the 13th best offensive tackle in the draft. and thinks that he could actually potentially contribute, provide some depth. When it comes to offseason changes, kind of touched upon it. Obviously, the Tyreek Hill addition, the addition of Terran Armstead definitely is going to help kind of boost the offensive line. Added Chase Edmonds, added Sony Michel, Mostert as well. So kind of coming from that 49ers system. Lost Devontae Parker. Again, I don't think that's that big deal. I think they, kept Preston Williams, Gesicki, and obviously Waddle. And that's, a lot of people are excited about that kind of wide receiver class.
Big separators and a lot of talent for sure. Yeah. And Will Fuller didn't really play at all for them last year. Parker, not really.
That was a total bust. There was a lot of people coming in last season that were very, very hyped about.
Yeah, I think
the exact same thing that always happens with him is he's injured.
He's certainly in the range of outcomes where he would contribute nothing like he did. But I think again, losses. I think Brian Flores is going to make a difference on the defensive side of the ball. And in addition is the head coach Mike McDaniel. That's a central kind of question about how the Dolphins are going to play. Is how can McDaniel kind of handle and transition from San Francisco? What elements can he bring of that offense?
And that's the thing is again, like, these are open questions. The thing is again, when we're talking about market expectations, they're being priced aggressively.
That's
with those open questions.
I really don't understand the this person was under X coach. He will therefore bring the same system to a new team, as if we don't have so many counter examples. How many Bill Belichick coaches are we going to go through before we can finally say, okay, Bill's magic is contained within? I'm not sure. No. I'm not sure where why we're still buying into the coaches being able to replicate where their coaching tree.
One addition that I also liked, obviously I lost Jacoby Brissett, but replaced him with Teddy Bridgewater, which I think is definitely a big improvement. Regardless of whether Tua struggles or not, but even if Tua gets hurt, which we know he's kind of been injury prone, has suffered from injuries, suffered from not just, kind of recovering from that devastating hip injury from a couple of years ago, but he had rib injury, kind of index finger injury kind of last year that not only caused him to miss games, but just disrupted his play as well. So to have, I think, year in and year out, we know it really is important to have a strong backup quarterback. A couple teams the last few years flirted with trying to use Teddy as a starter. I don't think he's a great starter, but man, I think he's an awesome backup.
Great backup. He can really adequately fit in.
So in 2022, again, priced at 9, aggressive. Division plus 435, plus 165 to make the playoffs. Super Bowl plus 3,300. Again, Pythag 2.0 model, no bet. 14th hardest schedule, so kind of just average. They have a net benefit of 5 days of rest. Mean spread is basically flat.
The central question for me with the Jets was, I think we're going to learn a lot about Zach Wilson. And for the Dolphins is, I think it's really a kind of a new offense that has not been tried in the NFL, which is how much can receivers after the catch make a difference. And I think we'll sort of get some signal that I don't even care about the results from the first 4 games. And I'm almost expecting them to lose to the Ravens, lose to the Bills, lose to the Bengals. Maybe they'll beat the Patriots. But even if they're 1-3, if I kind of see some takeaways that this offense could work, and it might take some time. It's a new system. It's a new coach. That could be a future spot to buy.
Again, the mitigating factors to support the Tua truthers out there is, I think we all have to admit that, he's been in a very bad situation. Worst offensive lines the last few years. Coaches constantly rotating. So you look at 3 different offensive coordinators the last 3 years. And then, even this offseason, kind of still flirting with potentially signing or trading for Deshaun Watson. Kind of a broader kind of macro thesis trade here, which is to fade every team that wanted Deshaun Watson. The fact that they would leverage the brand, the reputation, the money, sentiment from fan bases, over-lever yourself in order to get someone like Deshaun Watson.
It's a desperation move. That's exactly what you're describing. Is an organization desperate for their savior. But I think even to your point about Tua, remember his rookie season, they had this kind of arbitrary start date where Ryan Fitzpatrick led the Dolphins to a 5-3 start, and they kept on taking him out of games Right, the Tua story with the Dolphins has been rocky from the start. With that said, I think the move of Devontae Parker and trading for Tyreek Hill signals that they're going to build an offense around Tua's strengths. Tua is a very accurate quarterback. He's not going to be able to win deep in the same way that Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen can win deep. And the offensive line was dreadful last year. I'm looking at stuff perfectly blocked plays, which essentially looks at if there's one weak link on your offensive line, there's likely going to be a pressure or a sack. The Dolphins were 3.5 standard deviations worse than the mean on plays basically that were not quick outs. 3.5 standard deviations. I think the Dolphins are going to run an RPO offense, which is what they started to do in the second half of the year, where they had success, which basically mitigates the effect of unperfectly blocked plays because you're getting the ball out really, really quickly. Can you be one-dimensional like that? The offensive line is still dreadful. They're rushing. They were 30th last year, 30th in success rate, 31st in yards per carry. They were dreadful, and that's not really going to change, I don't think, with additions of running backs.
The addition of Terran Armstead is going to help, but it's still a bit of a Band-Aid, you could say. I'm going under on the Dolphins is because, again, it's baking in too much expectation, and it could go sideways. But I understand the bull argument.
Yeah, I think there's a bull argument, and I think that's why I like more of the tail end and the alternate line.
All right, let's move on to the Patriots. 2021, the win expectations was 9. They went over, went 10-7. 10-7 also ATS. And we see just that dramatic kind of mid-season surge from the Patriots where they were upgraded by pretty much every media outlet. They couldn't keep up with the Patriots fast enough. Started out a little bit sluggish, but had, even though they lost and didn't cover versus the Cowboys in week 6, that was another good game that the Patriots really performed well in. I think if we probably look, I would say they were probably won most of that game. Yeah, so the win probability was 64%. Came back, crushed the Jets, beat the Chargers, and that was kind of that baseline where then they surged over the next couple weeks. Which, when I'm looking at this too, the teams that they beat, I mean, it's great that you're winning, it's great that you're covering, but I mean, beating the Panthers, beating the Browns, beating the Falcons, like I don't know if that's like necessary, like justification to like get so excited.
Putting myself back in the shoes there, I think there's still a little bit of optimism on Carolina then, right? The wheels hadn't totally fallen off. And the Browns certainly were good, and I think the power ranking, even indicates that as the 10th best team. And certainly the Chargers people were bullish on. And that, in some sense, it was like 2 pretty impressive wins, and a 45-7 win over the Browns was certainly a big one there. So I don't think it was kind of the Broncos, if we remember early last year, beating the Jaguars and Giants and Jets in the first 3 weeks. And everyone was like, oh, what can we really make of this? They played some terrible teams. But I think the Patriots did have some quality wins.
Also playing competitive versus the Bucs.
Yeah, I think if we look at the mean win probability, I think they were actually positive in that game.
Yeah, 50%. So,
and looking back, that game looked a little more impressive. Kind of, you can create the cases retrospectively and saying, oh, okay, maybe there was something there that wasn't just a total fluke.
It was really the Chargers game that really ignited that surge kind of mid-season. I mean, it went from, in week 4, the 20th ranked team to, in 10 weeks, the 4th ranked team. You do not see that every season. What are your kind of views on Mac Jones from last year?
I mean, I guess this is kind of a question about the McDaniels departure, because if Jones is really a product of McDaniels' system, then we can see him taking a step back. But I think that's almost has to be the conclusion, considering how coddled he was as a quarterback, especially early on.
A lot of teams got better, but the Patriots were certainly not one of them. So I'd say, again, even from some of Ron's feedback around the draft, wasn't necessarily super positive. Didn't love the first round pick, thought they took him too early. Didn't have anything like super meaningfully positive to talk about Tyquan Thornton. I've read other things about him as well that suggest that he's not really a NFL caliber kind of wide receiver. He's lightning fast, and that kind of seduced a lot of kind of evaluators. But maybe he's going to be more of like a punt returner, kick returner, and that's certainly not worth a second round pick. Maybe see even PFF ranked them 192, and for a second round pick, I mean that is a huge
reaches. Both picks, 86 to 29, and massive reaches. I don't think I mean, we can give Bill Belichick the benefit of the doubt on the coaching side. His drafting profile hasn't exactly been too strong in recent.
Pierre Strong, I've heard a little bit of kind of positive things around him. Ron also highlighted that as the best pick in their draft, which again says something. That's your 4th round pick.
For sure, but also, how much is he contributing this year? Probably not. They've got a backfield of Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris. And
the thing is they did is we kind of go into the offseason. They lost Brandon Bolden, who was certainly their most used kind of 3rd down back. Yeah. So who's going to really provide that? Obviously,
and James White is hurt. I think they gave that role like J.J. Nelson. But it seems the Patriots have had so many of these guys from Danny Woodhead to and Brandon Bolden was a practice squad player.
Yeah,
I think these guys are they're growing trees for the Patriots.
This is the thing is, so that's where I feel like Bill Belichick is again getting a little bit complacent in the fact that this is how past performance. This is what we've been able to do. We've been able to like take guys off the street and turn them into an NFL starter in 2 seasons and then ditch them and kind of move on to the next kind of guy off the streets. How long is that? Like now, because you're really starting to lose some of the foundational guys that have really supported this franchise for the last decade or so. Not only did they lose them, they also lost their running back coach, their offensive line coach, and their wide receivers coach. They lost kind of 2 studs on the offensive line, Shaq Mason and Karras. And again, a lot of that has been because of cap casualty type losses. Same thing around J.C. Jackson as well, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, because they've spent so much money on guys like Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Nelson Aguilar. I mean, these are bad decisions.
Yeah.
And again, I feel like there's this hubris from Bill Belichick that, it doesn't matter, I'll make it work.
But I think to your point about kind of the potential Belichick hubris is that at some point the cornerback talent's going to matter, right? Like when you lose Stephon Gilmore, you lose J.C. Jackson, and they're started to slate Terrence Mitchell, Jalen Mills, and Jonathan Jones. I mean, these guys have not been good NFL cornerbacks. At some point, the talent's got to catch up.
That's why 8.5, I feel like, is super aggressive. One of the reasons why I like the under. It's a tough schedule, too. 7th hardest schedule. Net rest, minus 10 days.
It seems the only case for the Patriots is that they were good last year. And therefore they'll be good next year.
I feel like this is more like the Patriots have been good for the last decade. So
for sure. But I think even after Brady left, there was kind of a little bit of, there's some pessimism here. Maybe this Patriots team is, they're done. The dynasty's over. Like they were good. There's no way around it. They were a top 5 team. But if you just project forward, at some point, the cliff's gonna fall.
And again, this is a tough schedule. I mean, and also in the back half of the season, kind of looks like especially tough. Especially after you kind of get the Jets, Colts, Jets. They have like a kind of 5-game span there in the middle of the season where they get a little bit of a respite. And then they're on prime time 5 games in a row. I was actually very surprised. I had to double check this to make sure that this graph wasn't pulling in some error. But they're going Thanksgiving, Thursday night, Monday night, Sunday night, then Christmas. So going to be a big stage, going to be shifting sentiment across kind of the Patriots, kind of no matter what. But at 8.5, it's hard to find 9 wins here. So let's go and close with the Bills. Last year, we're also kind of a Super Bowl favorite. Started the season as the 3rd-ranked team, moved up to the best team for a little while there in the beginning of the season, and then even to close the season, in arguably one of the best games in NFL history, with the Chiefs in the playoffs, going to OT, kind of back and forth. A lot of people suggest that the Bills were still better than the Chiefs. So they ended up going 11-6, meeting expectation of 11, went 9-6-2 against the spread, made better, $100 better, $100. Always, no one ever kind of gave up with them. They had that really nasty game versus the Jags when they lost 9-6, total head scratcher, and then got blown out by the Colts at home a couple weeks later in kind of miserable weather game.
I was actually on the Colts that week. I had a whole extensive write-up about how I thought the Bills hadn't been tested on the run defense, and that if the Colts got control of the game early, they could just run all over them. I mean, look, they had plenty of bad luck, too. It wasn't just some bad losses. They were 0-5 in one-score games. So while there were some kind of head-scratching losses, there also were probably some more wins in there.
Yeah, and if we kind of move on, we kind of see the market was super hot on them, of course, being one of the top teams. It kind of stayed hot on them. They were a kind of top 10 pick in the super contest. Looks like pretty much half the season were more competitive than even 11 wins would suggest, which kind of goes to your point of kind of being 0-5 in one-score games, kind of getting some like anti-luck. We look at the 7-day line change on them on a week-to-week basis. The line was pretty much consistently always moving in their favor. Anything else that kind of sticks out to you on the kind of week-by-week basis?
Yeah, looking back, the Steelers game was a bit weird, and it gives me almost a little bit of pause on Josh Allen. Meaning I think the Bills have a really good case to be Super Bowl favorites, but the consistency is not there in the same way that it is for kind of the Mahomes and the Rodgers. But there's some surprising losses, right? The Chiefs aren't scoring 6 points against the Jaguars. The Chiefs are not losing a game to the Steelers early in the year. That sort of sticks out to me as almost a word of caution.
But they were also very lucky from an injuries perspective. So they were kind of ranked kind of second most healthy team last year. So really never got dinged by the injury bug in a meaningful way that would kind of disrupt their performances. And we know that kind of on a season by season basis, that's going to be very difficult to sustain. And even still, again, they were 11-6, 9-6 against the spread. It's not like they were necessarily kind of crushing expectation. That's why I'm not necessarily super bullish on them. And as we kind of, again, relative to expectation, because especially as we kind of go into the offseason, so they picked up Elam from Florida, go Gators, definitely one of the top ranked kind of quarterbacks in the class. Ron loved that pick, thought that was their number one need, especially since they lost Levi Wallace in the offseason. And then also Kadarius White tore his ACL in November. We don't know. He's not going to start the season, or it's going to be very unlikely that he's going to start the season. Who knows when he's going to come back. I mean, when you rely on speed, you rely on pivoting like a cornerback does. I mean, kind of coming back from an ACL injury, it's hard to imagine you're necessarily going to be the same kind of player that you were. So kind of getting that young blood in, it's going to be, kind of really important. He's likely going to be starting right off the bat. The other thing is I mean, not a lot of rookie cornerbacks play well in their first season, even if they're kind of a top 5 pick.
So I think if there were cornerbacks to succeed, having the safety duo of Hyde and Poyer behind you is certainly playing to the strengths, which is to say that he's put in the right situation to succeed.
Yeah, no, that's great points. I mean, arguably the best safety duo in the NFL. I don't think that safety duo when they were on the field at the same time gave up 1 touchdown for 20 yards last year. So kind of always protecting the deep shot. When it comes to those offseason changes, I think the thing to highlight here the most is the loss of Brian Daboll at OC. How is that going to impact play calling, the rhythm of the offense? They're replacing him with Ken Dorsey, who was their quarterback coach, so you have at least a little bit of continuity there. It's like
that has some signal, actually, which is that they're really trying to continue course. They're staying within and not trying to reinvent themselves. But
yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think where we've talked about in the previous teams when there's been disruption either at the head coaching or the offensive coordinator or what the play calling is going to be, there's a lot of uncertainty. I would probably tilt more so here along with kind of like how you just described it, is there's less uncertainty here around how that play calling is likely to be. I think keeping it in-house, keeping it not just in-house, but at the quarterback coach, somebody who Josh Allen is still very familiar with, that it's very likely. And how can you look at the performance of the offense the last couple of years and be like, oh, we need to make a change?
Yeah, exactly. Which I think points to kind of more macro point about like buying into organizations that are doing things the right way.
Yeah, and the one thing that I wanted to point out too is the drafting of James Cook, running back from Georgia in the second round. I mean, Zach Moss really kind of never caught on, and they're definitely a team that wants to kind of distribute the ball in the backfield. And one thing that I was reading about is when the Bills struggled in those games that we kind of highlighted, like versus the Jags, like versus the Colts, and even that game versus the Patriots in that miserable weather that they lost 14-10, was Dermott explicitly lamenting the fact that they couldn't run the ball and that he wanted to run the ball more, that's like what a successful team has to be able to do in those particular situations. And then picking James Cook in the second round, I'm wondering if the loss of Brian Daboll, again, suggests that the offense should stay kind of consistent with what it was. But I wonder if this opens the door for McDermott to have more influence, and that if he has this affinity to want to run the ball more.
Yeah. I mean, my lean is that's just coach speak. They were third last year in pass rate over expected, passing 5% of the time. But, we'll know early on whether or not, and again, that can change, but where they're leaning there. I actually wanted to highlight a different, draft pick of theirs, which is their punter. The Bills really struggled on special teams. Matt Reese has got a massive leg. I think if anyone's been on Twitter or YouTube, you've seen that. And the Bills were dead last in punt average, 42 yards. Even if you improve that to, 50 yards, that's still, even if they're punting 3 times a game, that stuff adds up. That's a couple hundred yards over the course of the season.
Yeah, no, that's a great call out. I wonder how well he'll do, coming from San Diego State, punting in elements,
That's right.
like Buffalo. But yeah, if you can improve performance there, that's one of those kind of things that goes a little bit unrecognized. It's not sexy, but we know when you're watching the games, you're seeing these things play out, that can certainly move the needle.
Yeah, yards are yards.
So let's go into 2022. 12 wins, as we talked about at the top. Man, that's hot. Playoffs minus 525. There's so much that can go wrong in like anyone's season. I would never bet minus 525. And then plus 600 to win the Super Bowl, which is also one of the highest numbers that I've really seen over the last couple of years. So market very hot on the Bills, the Pythag model 2.0. Again, no bet. Again, one of the things I did want to mention was Pythag 1.0. That indication suggests that you should bet the Bills over. Got a positive net rest of plus 12 days, mean spread approaching a touchdown, well over a field goal, around minus 5 points. We can see it on the screen. Pretty much heavy favorites in 5-6 games. And again, they don't have a very tough schedule. It's basically middle of the road. We see it's 15th kind of hardest schedule. And you're obviously going to benefit when you're playing the Jets twice, you're playing the Lions, you're playing the Bears. And then again, you only got really a handful of games for super tough teams, or arguably tough teams. Rams, Ravens, Packers, Bengals. So that's where I guess I could see the angle towards why you might want to take them over the 12, even as aggressive as it is. Mostly because this looks like a relatively accommodative schedule.
To counter that slightly, they've got a bunch of tough away games, right? They're playing at LA, at Baltimore, at Kansas City, at Cincinnati, and some of their tougher games actually come on the road as opposed to at home. 12 is a huge number. It's a huge number, and so many things can go wrong in an NFL season. That betting over is a real tough sell.
Yeah, the home away split is a good call out too, especially the first 4 games. 3 road games out of that first 4. So away at the Rams, kick off the season, away at the Dolphins, away at Baltimore, and then you get a little bit of a respite versus Pittsburgh at home, but then you go right back on the road versus the Chiefs. So that's certainly a tough kind of first 6 games there. Then they go into their bye, and then they kind of come out and play on Sunday Night Football versus the Packers. It's going to be a high-profile game. But already, even now, they're like minus 4 in that game. So getting a lot of kind of a benefit of the doubt, minus essentially a touchdown versus the Vikings. These are some aggressive spreads in my view. Again, that just kind of piles into the fact of just how hot the market is on the Bills.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you.
All right, so that was a good kind of rundown of the AFC East. Kind of one of the best bets that we had was taking the Patriots kind of under. A lot of question marks around the Dolphins kind of heading in the season. And then I can think we're maybe a little bit split on the Jets.
Definitely split on the Jets.
Have a tough schedule. I don't love Zach Wilson. I'm happy to be proven wrong. We'll be back next week and be previewing another division kind of as we head into training camp. So we'll see you then. We're going to hit the closing bell.